Okay, we're going to give this a shot number 2 here. So I know StreamYard likes headphones, and I had something else plugged into my phone. So maybe it got confused, and that's why you couldn't hear anything. So if somebody can give me a heads up on that, that would be really great. It's almost like you have to have a special education to be able to use technology these days. Ah, sounds to me. Okay, it looks like you can hear it. Hopefully you can hear it because I just checked in on my Facebook and I could hear it. So sorry. All right, so it is Friday afternoon. It is October the 6th, and it is October. It is October. What a long year it's been. What a crazy year. You know, we are at such a very, very crazy, crazy place. If you watch me, my Facebook feed, which I know gets now shadow banned, and even though it says there's 15,000 people who follow my page, they never see all of my comments and my updates. But I am watching the news every day. Of course, I have lots of time to do that. And there's like crazy stuff going on. The whole thing with Congress is the whole thing with Congress right now, and I'm sure most of you who know me have followed that they voted out Kevin McCarthy, and they've nominated 6 Republicans, including Donald Trump. And I think Trump has said he would do it if he needed to. So they got Kevin McCarthy out by getting all the Democrats to vote with 8 Republicans. All of that's kind of crazy in itself, guys. But I think it is a political tactic that we need to keep in mind and figure out how to use that to get some other things done, because there are certain issues, certain social issues, such as family issues, that Democrats agree on, and actually some of the Republicans do not agree on. So that is that was a very interesting situation, and we're going to know within the next 2 weeks something incredible is going to happen. So I wanted to talk to you about my life. I've laid low. I've not shared a lot of those things because I am waiting for some events to happen. And the players are doing everything they can um, to block the inevitable, and they are getting as creative as they can. But they have until now. The threshold date is Monday, October the 9th, where the Attorney General is to file their responsive brief to my brief, in which basically I argued that the conviction was a nullity as a matter of law because my client Wendy had already been vindicated and reversed, and they can't have an accessory to a crime. They don't have a crime. I hope these earphones are blocking out some of the background noise where I'm sitting. There's a lot of background noise. So that is the date, October the 9th. It was supposed to be September the 9th, and they asked for an extension. They asked for an extension. They switched people in the Attorney General's office who were working on it and asked for more time. So I think that's kind of interesting. I think you should find that very interesting. It means, yeah, what does it mean? I asked them to just enter an agreed order and they refused to do it. There is something else that's going on, which some of you may or may not be involved with or are watching, which is a very important trial that's being live streamed in the state of Florida. Has those of you who know me know I'm very involved in child welfare litigation, parents' rights, trying to get parents out of the horrible situation with get them out of the horrible situation that they suffer with CPS. So in the state of Florida, in 2016 and 17, there was a case in which a little girl who was 9 years old suffered from a chronic pain syndrome called complex regional pain syndrome, CRPS. which also has had the name of RSV, which is reflex sympath reflex sympathetic disorder or something, which is basically also a pain syndrome. And this little girl's mother was a nurse, and the father was a retired police officer or fire chief. If I get a fact wrong, I'm so sorry. I know there's all kinds of people now like watching and following this. So if I get an individual little fact, so she was, her mother was a nurse. They tried some pain medications that didn't work. The mother investigated, researched, and she found out that there was a facility in the country of Mexico that would provide her daughter with a ketamine coma. In other words, extremely high doses of ketamine for multiple days. I think it was 3 to 5 days. And basically, the reason is because the pain changes, the chronic pain, the consistent pain changes the chemistry in the brain and how it reacts to pain, that the ketamine would break that cycle and sort of reset the brain. Now, I'm not a victim of chronic pain. I've never been a victim of chronic pain. So, and I've never been a victim, thank you, Jesus. I've never been a victim of chronic depression or anything that it becomes so overwhelming that you can't function. All right. Okay, I'm going to hang on. I want to check my video here. Make sure you are. All right, let me see. Okay, I'm going to hang on. Yep. I want to check my video. Yeah, I did. All right. So so this little girl suffered from this. Her mother took her down for a ketamine coma infusion. The little girl got better, and then she had a relapse. She had an acute situation. They took her to Johns Hopkins. She ended up at Johns Hopkins, All Children's Hospital. Johns Hopkins said they would give her ketamine, and then they said no, they weren't going to give her ketamine. And then it's like a switch flipped, and the doctors at Johns Hopkins said that the mother was, well, they say the child was Munchausen's by proxy, but basically Munchausen's by proxy is a diagnosis of a parent, not a child. So they said that the mother was making up the illnesses and actually making her daughter sicker. And so they would not let them take their daughter home. They cut them off from seeing her. They isolated her. Now, for those who are familiar, this also rings familiar to the case out of New Jersey, Massachusetts. Somebody help me with the Justine Pelletier case, where she had a very debilitating mitochondria disease, and they held her hostage in the hospital for several months. It's right about the same time frame. We can look it up. Justine Pelletier may have been a couple years before, but both of these cases sprang out of the use in Children's Hospital of what's called CAPS, or child abuse pediatricians. So child abuse pediatricians were created by the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2009, and it's an extended fellowship after getting your pediatric certification for, I don't know, it's 18 to 24 months, where you learn the constellation of injuries that are to be diagnosed as child abuse. And so these child abuse pediatricians started getting specialized employment at children's hospitals, and then they diagnose with child abuse. Of course, these hospitals get millions of dollars from the state agencies, and I've already looked up Vanderbilt. I've already looked up All Children's in Florida. They get millions of dollars from the state, and they are diagnosing children with child abuse and then getting them taken and put in CPS custody, or state's custody. So they held this little girl, Johns Hopkins did. They cut off her parents, and then they got CPS involved and got court orders to prevent the parents from even having contact. For a while, they had supervised contact. They held this little girl who's now like 10, going on 11 years old. for 3 months, from October the 7th until January the 17th. And they're all the while, they're fighting in juvenile court, fighting in juvenile court. They have attorneys for the mother, attorneys for the father, attorneys for the children. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to hire private counsel. And they are fighting and fighting in the juvenile court system. These medical professionals are testifying against them, saying that their daughter does much better when she's not in their care. And then it gets to the point where basically the father is told that if he will get rid of his wife, if he'll divorce his wife and get rid of his wife, that his daughter can come home. And he basically agrees. I mean, he is now at the point he doesn't feel like he has any choice. And ditto, I get it. I've heard this before. This is not the only case like that. So he believes he doesn't have any choice but to do this. And so he tells them, yes, he will divorce his wife or move her out or do whatever he has to do so his daughter can get out of the hospital. And then the next day, the mother commits suicide, hangs herself in the garage because she basically could not live with the idea of being isolated from her daughter, but she also felt extreme guilt for being the reason that her daughter was held hostage. I mean, I deal with parents all the time who are going through, oh my gosh, I must be close to a fire station. I hope you guys can't hear that. I do have on headsets, so maybe it's buffering some of that out. But, I see that all the time where parents are put in such horrible situations where they are tested to separate from each other, to destroy the family, to be able to have a child returned. This is not new. This is not novel. I mean, I don't know. I don't think they put the jury selection on the air because I didn't watch that, but they've live streamed everything else. And I've watched the live streamed. I've watched the testimony of the witnesses. I've watched even when the jury is out, the live stream is still running. You can see all the discussions between the judges and the attorneys. The judge at the very beginning of it was extremely frustrated with the plaintiff, which is Maya's family attorney, very frustrated with him. He said he had 700 witnesses, thousands of pages of documents. He said it was going to take 8 weeks to do this trial, which is an extremely extraordinary long time. And it seemed like every morning, the first 3 or 4 mornings, the family attorney, Mr. Anderson, was shuffling papers and rumbling around and hemming and hawing. On the other side, the defendant, who is the hospital, has 8 attorneys. 8 attorneys. So the family has 1 attorney and the hospital has 8 attorneys. Now, the family is asking for $220 million against All Children's Hospital. That is, of course, a huge amount. There's no hospital that's ever going to settle for anything closer than that. Whether or not they had any pre-trial settlement negotiations, I cannot tell you. I can tell you that there was one of the people who was a party to this that did settle with them for, I don't know, a couple $1,000,000. I mean, that's a pretty substantial amount. But I mean, they basically stole this little girl's childhood and her brother's childhood because she had a younger brother who was a couple years younger, and they stole his childhood. I mean, all of his childhood since he was like 8 years old has been trying to deal with getting out from under this government tyranny. So, so then as I'm watching it and I'm watching the witnesses being called, and one of the very first witnesses they called was a doctor. I want to say it's Dr. Hannah. I'm not sure, but he is a doctor who was a foreigner. I mean, I would say probably Indian, maybe. He had a very heavy accent, which was basically Indian. I mean, I don't want to try to dissect it, but So he started talking about the ketamine treatments and how important the ketamine treatments were. He did a great job. He had already started ketamine treatments for her. He did an excellent job explaining it. And then he talked about how ketamine was one of the 12 essential drugs that all countries have to have. There are certain drugs, such as doxycycline, some of the drugs that were discussed, the parasite medicine. I'm going to draw a blank here on some of these, but the parasite medicine that everybody made fun of during COVID. And ketamine is one of the 12 essential drugs that countries must have. And then he also explained how while he was in India, there was a very, very bad train accident where two trains had basically collided head on. And there had been like 400 people that were all tangled up in between these trains that were all mixed up. And he said, he was called to the scene and they took tons of ketamine with them. And basically, if somebody's in shock, it slows down their heartbeat. It gets the oxygen it makes sure that they get oxygen to their brain because it stabilizes the blood pressure. And it's basically LSD. I mean, it is a psychedelic drug, no doubt. It's a hallucinogenic, but you can use it in tragic situations. So he talked about ketamine. There was another doctor, the doctor from Mexico they brought in, which he did an excellent job talking about the treatment that he provides for ketamine and how he explained it to them. And, the hospital's trying to say, well, the child could have died from the ketamine treatments, etc. So this whole case is about child abuse pediatricians. It's about complex medical issues for children. It's about empowering organizations to take, or empowering institutions to take power and control over children outside of their parents' consent. It's about hospitals having the power to document things, to color the record, to color the child's record. And it's really frightening. It's really frightening. For instance, one person who is a hospital social worker, she took the stand and she talked about how, the child was doing so much better when she was in the hospital away from her parents. She was doing so much better. Now we're talking about a baby. She's like 10 years old, like 10, 11 years old. And she's just a baby. I mean, my granddaughter now is 11 and, she's just a little girl. And, she was in her wheelchair. Oh, she was down at the art center. And then as she starts being confronted with her own record, she talks about the child falling out of bed and crying and not being able to get up and nobody helping her. She talks about how the child was sad when she found out she wasn't able to go home for Christmas. Can you imagine telling a little 10-year-old girl who's been in a hospital for 8 weeks that she can't go home and see her family for Christmas? And then they talk about how they left the door open because they were afraid she was going to fall out of bed, even when the child's attorney was there to talk to her. So the records are so inconsistent of what the child was going through when she was there, what people were saying to her, how people were treating her parents. The child would try to have a phone call with her parents and the social worker would sit in the room and monitor it. I mean, the control of that institution over the family. So those are, as I look at it globally, knowing what I do, watching what I know about CPS, Terry LaPointe, who's done hundreds of articles about child abuse pediatricians and medical kidnapping. It's very hard to watch the whole thing. Hopefully somebody can very brilliantly pull out excerpts of it and make a really great summary of it. But I've stayed up. If I miss it during the day, I turn it on at night and go back and watch parts of it I've not seen. So honestly, I've been totally obsessed with it this week. This next week, Maya testifies. If you want to see any of it, you can go to YouTube and type Maya trial. It popped up for me. I think it's also, it's on Crime Prime something TV, and then they've got it on. It's on like 3 different platforms. So when I've been watching it off the platform, I've watched it. There have been 5 to 6,000 people watching. So I'm sure there's 10,000 plus people watching this. There's a Facebook page or Facebook group. Oh, ivermectin. Thank you, Yakini. Yeah, ivermectin is also one of the 12 essential medications. So I have, there's probably, I would say, 10,000 people watching this trial out of Sarasota, and it's so critical. Now, what you don't really see in here is the role of the juvenile court and these social workers and the juvenile court judges, because they defer. I mean, I know I've been in these situations and I've watched these cases. They defer to these medical child abuse pediatricians, the hospital social workers, those are there. And in this particular case, in Maya's case, the hospital social worker actually wrote a letter. She didn't turn over her records. She wrote a letter that she knew was going to be used by the juvenile court to determine whether or not the parents would have, thank you, Yakini, that whether or not the parents would have continuing contact with their daughter. I mean, this social worker wrote this letter. So the social worker is writing this letter about why the parents should have not have contact with their child, and that the judge is not seeing all these records about how depressed the child is, how sad she was she couldn't go home for Christmas, how she fell out of bed, how emotionally distressed she was wanting to see her family. So the judge never heard any of that and never saw any of that. And not the juvenile court has taken this letter, this hearsay letter. Now, I know I would say, now those attorneys in juvenile court, they should have done a better job. But no, I'm going to tell you, because actually, I know how it works in juvenile court, and I know how they let in this kind of inadmissible hearsay all the time. But in addition, in this particular case, when I started being active through social media, advocating all the way across the country, I went to Sarasota, and I met with some people there, and the attorney that represented Maya's father, I met her. I've sat down and talked to her. I've had communications with her. When the movie came out, she had kind of let me know before a little bit about this case to watch it. And so, I mean, I know at least one of the attorneys that have been involved. Now, I think the child's attorney has already testified. I missed that one. I'm going to have to go back and watch it. But I know that they're not incompetent. And, there are a lot of incompetent attorneys that work in the juvenile system. And people call me all the time and they're like, my attorneys won't get the evidence in. My attorneys won't defend me. And a lot of them don't. And a lot of them just say, do whatever DCS says and you'll get your kids back. Just do what they say. And it's so wrong on so many levels. So the overview again in this trial, here is what I am seeing. I'm seeing we have a child, 2016-17, complex medical condition. The All Children's Hospital wanted to take control of this child, wanted to be in control of this child's treatment without any intervention of the parents. Now, why is that important today in 2023 from a totally different perspective? And so as we sit here in 2023, one of the things that is very much current is the issue with the transgender hormones, transgender mutilation, etc. So there was a case out of Tennessee and Kentucky. So Tennessee and Kentucky both passed laws this year that prohibited gender blocking hormones and the administration of cross-gender hormones and gender surgery, transgender surgery for minors. And so a case out of Kentucky and a case out of Tennessee took it to federal court. And they tried to get a restraining order on those laws. And in the Sixth Circuit, which is Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, the Sixth Circuit has denied that restraining order. Basically a vote of 2-1, though. And I want you to know that there is a dissenting opinion in that. And that dissenting opinion is pretty strong, where one of the judges, which I think is kind of frightening, one of the judges makes a comment, and I probably need to do a very organized video on this with the case in front of me because I don't have it in front of me right now, about how this type of surgery was well established, safe, and effective, and should be considered a normal course of treatment. That's what one of the judges said. So this is, and the question with the other two judges was really, do the states have the power to make those kinds of laws? And they said, yes, they do. Except, there are times when federal government can supersede that, such as with a federal mandated vaccine. But this opinion says the states have the right to make certain determinations as to what minors can and cannot do. So they can say a minor can't smoke. They can say a minor can't drink alcohol. Federally, we say minors can't work. And so to say a minor cannot have a certain medical treatment is a legitimate state interest. And they said it's not a sexual discrimination because we're saying it applies to boys and girls both. It doesn't apply just to one sex. So, they really abuse the sexual discrimination argument. Sexual discrimination argument is if you say women can't vote. Okay, that's sexual discrimination. Or if you say there's a certain job and only men can apply, unless, you just can't do those things anymore. But this was totally different. So when you look at the transgender, where we're going with that, what we already know some of these hospitals are doing, we know that Vanderbilt was doing gender transition for minors. We know that in Idaho they were doing it. We know there are well over 100 gender transition clinics in the United States now. We know that there are certain cases, such as the case out of Texas, where the court actually ordered that the better parent was the one who was going to permit and to facilitate gender transition. Oh, and all of that to circle back around, because my mind is just bigger than one thing at a time. My mind is bigger than one case. My mind is bigger than this one event that happens. I always am looking at how does that affect everything going on around us. So there's a lot of evidentiary rulings as an attorney. When I watch the Maya case, there's a lot of evidentiary rulings that are kind of interesting. I don't want to get into the weeds of that because that's a whole different discussion that if you want to hear me talk about evidence, we'll just talk about evidence. I am putting together a training on evidence for dummies, evidence for lay people, some law people too, because honestly, a lot of lawyers do not understand evidence. So evidence for lay people. I'm got a training that's going to be, I'm working with Vince Davis out of California. And so he's doing these trainings the first Saturday of the month. I am going to do a training with him. And then later I will be sharing that training on other platforms as well. And I have a couple other trainings coming up, and I'm really gearing these trainings right now for just you everyday people, just for everyday people.